The quiet ledger. I didn't notice the absence the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue. It was quieter than that. A little bubble in the day where something should have given back. I was at my desk at the city records office on Cedar and North, first floor over the parking garage that always smells like wet iron. I had my half-warm coffee in the mug my sister sent 3 Christmases ago, ugly tree, stamped crooked, and I set it on the blotter that hides the ring it left last winter. My monitor took a little longer to wake than it should have. The fluorescent above me did that slow warm-up flicker that makes your eye blame itself. I put my bag under the desk and kicked it into the familiar notch, checked the inbox that says 10 messages even when it's 9, and looked up to say good morning to Hank across from me. There was no Hank. The desk was there, and the plant he always killed by being kind to it. The little picture of a kid in a parka with a mouth full of snow in a frame made from 2 tongue depressors and a lot of glue. The jacket thrown on the chair like a man who doesn't like to hang things likes to pretend he engineering chaos. The jacket was the wrong one. That hurt in a small way I didn't understand. When a person's coat changes, your part of the world should complain. This one was a grey office store chair. No jacket, no pen cup. The plant was plastic. The picture frame held a stock photo of a mountain and a lake, smooth as a countertop. I blinked, and the mountain stayed. Hank in early, I said to no one, because nerves like an audience. The room had 4 of us, and we practice our good mornings like we practice anything we want to be true. "There's no Hank," said Clara, in the tone she uses for dilemmas that are actually rules. She stood by the copier with a stack of address change forms and a look on her face like the morning had already misbehaved. She has a way of moving paper that suggests any sheet could embarrass you if you make assumptions. "You all right?" she asked. I leaned forward in my chair because distance makes lying to yourself easier. Hank's desk had always been there, diagonal to mine, so we could complain in low voices about the job like kids under a blanket. The desk had been there yesterday. It was empty now in the blessed sense of nobody's things. The chair was tucked in. The keyboard sat centered. No pens, no busted candy bar wrapper turned into a tiny sash he'd leave for himself in an attempt at volunteer discipline. The calendar on the cubicle wall beside it stared blankly with a picture of a barn. There was no mark where somebody had erased a penciled appointment. It was clean marked as if this block of space had never been assigned to a person. "You're messing with me," I said, and my voice came out steady and then remembered it wasn't. "Messing," said Clara, like the word had arrived and she felt obligated to lay it on the counter. "Daniel, that desk's been open since they moved Beth to zoning. You okay?" "Beth?" I said. "You mean Hank. Big guy, fishes on the lake, talks about walleye like it's an uncle." She tipped her head the way a person doing math tries out a borrowed pencil. "Don't know a Hank," she said. "Do you need coffee that isn't from home?" The machine made a batch that tastes like pencils again, but at least it's hot. I could have made a joke about pencils to hide the way my neck had gone warm. I didn't. "I got coffee," I said. I looked at the mug, the ugly tree tilting where the decal bubbled. I didn't like the taste in my mouth. It wasn't fear. It was like you open the fridge expecting a certain hum, and it runs at a different note, and you start thinking about the age of the seal around the door. I got up and stood by the empty desk, like a man trying to see different shapes in a cloud. The air didn't smell like someone else's cologne. It didn't smell like anything. It had the office scent of paper and toner, and that faint plastic that rides off the back of a monitor. "He sits here," I said softly, because I didn't want to bruise anything with my voice. "Do you need to go upstairs to HR?" said Clara. "I can cover intake if you want 10 minutes. You look like you argued with the mirror too long." "I sleep fine," I lied. "I sleep like a dog, hears the train go by, half awake, half letting the sound run to the end." I turned and went back to my desk. The scanner in the corner of the room had a hiccup. It always hiccups when the page count hits a multiple of 50, like it needs to clear its throat to remind you you're boring it. The clock on the wall above the door clicked its second hand the way our clock does, louder than it has any right. I touched my laptop as if it were a thing that could answer me with heat. The plastic keys under my fingers felt the same, a little gritty from crumbs I deny dusting out enough the love-worn shine on A, S, and L. I opened the log of permit numbers. Yesterday I had typed a note beside 19-04185 that read, "Hank says hole is within variance. Check P 22. The note was gone. The permit was approved. My initials beside it. No comment. I have a mind that likes sequences. I keep my socks in 2 stacks because once a week I tell myself I'll get around to pairing the strays. My windows on the screen sit in the same places. Outlook in the left third, the database in the right. A little browser window for when you want to make sure a restaurant exists before you pretend you've been there. Everything tilted a degree off its normal. The windows were where they belonged. The colors felt wrong. The gray on the menu bar had softened with an update I hadn't approved. "You sure you're okay?" said Clara from far away, really 12 feet, but the distance had learned to lengthen. I made the face men with our kind of pride make when they don't want to go to a doctor. "Yeah," I said, sleepy. A man can lose a lot of small things and not notice the total. You can go a year without setting the stone you promised yourself you can't replace where the driveway dips and not call that neglect because the car learned the shape of it. I could have pretended I'd misremembered. I could have told myself Hank was a name I gave Beth by accident, like calling the dog by the kid S name when the two of them spend their lives near each other. But the desk being empty sat wrong in my mouth. I fill out forms about numbers. The numbers we file feed the city enough to keep the lights flickering at a respectable interval. I am not a man who calls lunch a miracle. I sent a permit approval to a company we pretend isn't owned by a council member because pretending keeps things indoors. And I moved a stack of blue paper from one side of the monitor to the other to pretend I had accomplished something. After 3 hours of productive lying to myself, I wrote Hank in the narrow strip of yellow paper I use for remembering passwords that aren't supposed to be on paper. I underlined it twice and stuck it to the corner of my monitor. Hank. At noon, I walked to Rudy A.'s coffee because the machine in the break room had learned to taste like pencils. Rudy A.'s sits at the corner of 2nd and State where the buses have nowhere else to release their breath. The shop always smells like beans and then cleaning solution on top because the owner is the kind of man who learned long ago that coffee shops will get sticky if their owners love coffee more than cleanliness. The barista with the red birthmark at the corner of her mouth usually rings me up. She always writes Dan on the cup like the last 2 letters weigh too much. She wasn't there. A boy with a kind of beard younger men these days like to pretend is substantial took my order and wrote D on the cup like he got tired halfway through, then stared at the screen of the register instead of at me. I looked around for the barista because if someone has a mark, you learn where you expect to see it. 2 high schoolers in bright jackets argued about sugar packets. A woman in a coat you have to check twice to make sure is not military tapped a finger against a newspaper that had more white space than a newspaper should. No red mark at the bar. When the boy handed me the cup, it had no marker on the side, no D. The surface was dry like it hadn't been drawn on by anything but air. "You change shifts?" I said. He blinked like I'd asked him to pull a tooth. "Do what?" "The girl," I said, and wished I hadn't said girl, wished I had said woman to make my mouth behave. "Red birthmark. Talks about dogs like they pay rent." "Regulars ask for her?" he said, and smiled like he'd been told he should and was trying to learn. "Must be a morning shift." "She works mornings? Since when?" He looked at the chalkboard like the answer might be written beside the names for drinks. "Since she did, I'm new." He had that journeyman's confidence in the wobble in his voice. I took my cup, lids clicking on the counter like a clamshell conversation, and walked out thinking about the way people talk to fill holes in other people's sentences. The afternoon I tried to pretend busy and failed. A man with hands that looked like he broke things on purpose came in and needed a permit for a dumpster on Larch. He wanted to put it in the middle of the street because the house his brother left him had learned to lean, and he didn't have another place to put the weight of what leaving means. "It's 2 days," he said, eyes sliding off mine to judge the clock. "I'll put cones." Rules say no. Rules also say it is a kindness to let a man solve a small problem his own way when he tells you about it in a voice that isn't trying to touch you. I wrote approved in red like I mean it and put the official stamp under it, the thunk and wet of the pad making it sound like a workday. I handed him the paper and he said, "Thanks, Hank." And I felt like my heart had its tongue out the wrong side of its mouth for a second. "It's Daniel," I said, too quick. "Right," he said, not looking at the nameplate that says D. Hollis with a little screw missing so it lists. I knew that. He left, the door closer, sighing like a person who walked around the answer and decided to wait another day to ask the question again. On my way home, I walked past the house with the boy who chalks that infinity fish on the sidewalk. He draws it in green when it's Thursday and in blue the other days. He had drawn it every week for 2 summers. I used to step over it like a superstition. Today, the sidewalk was blank. No dust on the toes of my shoes when I got to the corner. No smear of green. No lightning of blue between flag and crack. The house had a "for sale" sign hammered in the yard, the kind that respects a lawn. No toy on the step, no chalk bits in the gut of the hedges. I didn't know the boy's name, which I thought at the time would have forgave me for the small pang. I had enough in my head. I could carry only so many names. I stood at the stoplight and watched the left turn arrow go green long enough I felt mocked. The straight ahead went green, a sliver shorter than it should have. The thought sat there. Something in the timing was wrong. The car behind me honked gently like a well-trained dog. I crossed with my hands jammed in my coat pockets because if you don't have anything to carry, you give yourself something. At the corner before my building, a poster for last month's music festival had slumped on the pole into a reed of its own failure. Someone had stuck a new paper over it, an announcement from the county. Temporary closure, East Side Branch Library, until further notice. Mold remediation. The room of your life where your mind goes to read something longer than a street sign, closed by a word you can't touch. The photograph on the poster showed a smiling librarian with round glasses that didn't belong to East Side. Under that, a phone number that always rings too long. I pushed the front door of my building and it stuck against swollen wood. It does that on days when the river laughs at us. The hallway smelled like a mixture people in buildings like this agree upon. A little onion from somebody's dinner, a little clean from a mop, a little tired from old plaster. My apartment number is 3B. The B has been crooked since I moved in. The landlord never fixes the small things because if you string them together, they were a larger thing with a different price tag. The letter was straight. It looked glued on new. I put the key in the lock and it went in too smooth, like someone oiled a thing I had learned to accommodate. Inside, the fridge hummed at a pitch 1 notch lower than the morning. My chair, the one with the spring that squeaks if you shift, didn't squeak when I shifted. The receipt pile on the counter had squares, not a toppled attempt. The trash bag in the bin had the top folded like a nurse had said, "Here's how." I took a pen and a cheap spiral from the kitchen drawer. I wrote Hank Brenner in block letters on the first page. Under it I wrote red mark on barista. Under that I wrote chalk fish boy. I underlined each like I wanted to make their names stay. The pen left a good line. the way a pen does when it remembers it's not here to disappoint. I tore the page out and taped it to the wall above the table with a scrap of blue painter S tape I keep stuck to the microwave for when I need things to behave. I stood there a long minute looking at the tape. It looked ridiculous, a manifesto from a man who knows better. Then I took my phone and snapped a picture of the page so the image would live somewhere other than me. The next morning the page was blank, not ripped and replaced blank, the same paper, the same tape, taped to nothing. I should say how that felt. Like a bottle you open and expect cold air to come out, and something warm breathes instead. The photograph on my phone showed a spot on my wall with a square of sunlight that could have been where a paper wasn't T. It was a good photograph of absence. The file name was IMG 1943, like a little joke I didn't get, numbered inside a system that is never mine. On the table, the pen lay where I'd left it. The spiral's first page had the impression of writing, the faint topography you can see if you tilt your head. I ran a pencil over it at an angle, like I'd read in a detective book, and the marks lifted faintly for a second, then not. The graphite slid, but didn't catch. It was like what I had written had slid under the paper and out onto the table, and then the table had learned it was a wall, and the wall let go. I peeled the tape off because it looked like a man who likes props had bought one. The tape came away clean, like it had never loved anything. I went to work, and the desk across from me felt like it had always been waiting for the next person. Clara greeted me, then asked if I'd cover the counter because the line out the door had a woman in it who was the kind of angry you only get with a kitchen remodel. I said sure because I like the counter. The counter S, a place where men who understand paint say lucky things about their lives and then go home and unroll tarps. The first person wanted to change her name back, which is always a form that keeps one side of your mouth from behaving. She said her husband had gone to prison in the state over, and she wanted to complete the gesture. I stamped, and the ink took a little longer to dry on her paper, like it had been thinking about it too. The next person wanted a copy of a level 1 floor sketch from a building built in '72, the year they made everything out of yellow, and then regretted it. She said her father had done the drawings, and she wanted to see if his handwriting made a sound. I told her it was $5. She handed me a 10 and said keep the change, and then took the copy with both hands like a man takes a baby for the first time. By noon I felt better. Naming things for other people will do that. By 1 I had 3 emails from people on Cedar who wanted to know why the library closure notice had a wrong photo, like wrong photos make black mold easier to live with. I wrote back the sentence you were supposed to use. Please call the number listed for accurate information, and signed with my initials in a way that says nobody lives behind them. For 40 minutes, the scanner behaved. Its hiccup arrived at page 100 and sucked in 2 sheets and spit them out with their images squashed together like neighbors after a car arrives. The day felt like it wanted to be day. I wrote on a fresh page of the spiral, names and details, dates, then folded the page and put it in my wallet where money tries to be folded. When I got home after my shift, the page was gone. Not torn, not shredded. Gone. The spiral ring showed no memory of a page. My wallet held only a 20 and a 10, and a receipt from Rudy E.Guess, dated that day with a list of coffee, typed in a font that made the word look like it was trying out a disguise. There are many small jokes you can tell yourself if you want to push the edges of a thing back into place. I told myself my eyes were tired. I told myself I had dreamed the name Hank up out of a fiction I would later write. I told myself the barista had a day off, or 2 days off, or had never existed on my schedule. I walked by the boys' house again. No chalk. The for sale sign had a new rider, pending. The window boxes were empty but for dirt, smoothed as if by a giant thumb. The world had tidied itself a degree more than usual. I had not asked it to. The next morning, another person was gone, not one I knew. You know the guy who plays harmonica down by the post office, not well enough to clap, only enough to step around him with the decency you get credit for if you're done to make a face. He wasn't there, and his little spot beside the newspaper machine didn't have any paper cups or any shorelines drawn by last week's rain. The square of sidewalk he usually made his seam on had a neatness to it, like a man with a broom had passed through and found pride in the free corner. I wrote his lack down. I didn't know his name. I wrote Harmonica Man, which is the kind of name you use when you want to hold on to something without having to answer for the way you didn't look up the word you needed. I taped that to the wall again, little square of blue, a confession in construction paper. I took a picture of the wall and my eyes didn't to want to linger on the telephone. I went to bed with a voice in my head making gentle demands. Say who you are. Say where you came from. Say it in the tone you used when you told the last person who meant it that you were worth keeping around. I tried. Daniel Hollis, I said to the dark. My mother's name is Margaret. Dad was Alan. He drove a truck and liked the kind of radio where the DJ talked like he enjoyed his own jokes. Our street had a tangle of power lines where starlings would sit and tremble together until they decided to leave like one flesh. The sound our fridge made when it was new was honest. The sound it makes now is like someone apologizing for a habit. My foreman at the warehouse where I used to work before records was named Pete, and he wore a smile that didn't go up any higher than he allowed. He bent his back lifting boxes so we would love him for it. I live on 3rd. I know the smell of the sub shop far too well on nights when I done tea cook. My favorite number is 8, not because it means anything, but because it looks like a loop trying twice to fix itself. I said 100 tiny parts of me. I said the names of 3 people I had disappointed this year and hoped saying them counted for something. I fell asleep and woke like someone had held my eyes open and counted to 50. In the morning, the little tape on the wall held nothing. I opened the spiral. The impression marks had gone slack like skin after weight loss. The photograph on the phone was of the wall without paper. My notes in the computer were where I left them, but the one I had typed beneath 1904 on 85 read only check P22. No mention of Hank because there was no Hank to mention. The receipts I had collected to prove the boy at Rudy S. was writing letters like a man falling asleep now said cash thanks, typed in the kind of font you choose when you don't want to be accused of personality. When I looked in the mirror in the bathroom to see what face goes with this sort of thing, the skin was mine, and the mouth was mine, and the eyes looked like a man who visits the doctor once a year and lies about exercise. The face seemed like a new photograph of a familiar place. Different angle, a tree had been cut, a new stop sign had sprouted since last season. Around lunch, the county sent another advisory. This one was about an information systems outage. They use that term when the computer that runs the water plant throws a fit, or when the billing system forgets a street. The email used phrases like intermittent integrity and temporary loss of record continuity. Users may experience issues, it said, as if the experience were a dessert. The follow-up from the city manager's office had a tone designed to lay down across the nap on a table and smooth it. We are aware of minor discrepancies in public datasets, it said, and are working with vendors. Nobody used the word erasure because it belongs to a different kind of story. My neighbor, a man named Phil, who always wore a ball cap with a fish on it until last year when he started wearing a hat with a grey square because he doesn't like to be sold to, leaned into the doorway of my office around 2 and said, "You ever feel like the street gets longer?" "Every day," I said. He laughed. "No, really," he said. "Like you walk it and it takes 3 more steps and your mouth doesn't know where to put the complaint." He's the kind of man you don't think about unless he's close, which means he's a good neighbor in old buildings. "You okay?" he said. I nodded. He waited. "You really okay?" he said. He meant, I've seen men look like you do when the world gets out from under them. I said, I'm not sleeping, which is the kind of confession men are allowed. Drink less, he said. The fact that it's good advice isn't the same as it being useful. See you, he said, and left, like he wanted me to know his body still existed if the papers didn't. I started writing things in places that feel old-fashioned. Chalk on my wall, in small letters so the landlord wouldn't spot it. Names on the inside of my forearm with a pen my sister bought that writes on plastic. I wrote Daniel backwards on the mirror with a dry erase marker so I could see it forwards in the glass. I wrote my mother's maiden name under the calendar where no one but me will ever look, beside the hole where the nail used to be before they patched it with white that doesn't to match. I wrote the street I grew up on the bottom of a plate like a secret. The next morning, the chalk was clean, the ink on my skin had migrated to the sheet with no line at all, just a faint grey sadness. The mirror showed a smear where a rag had learned its job. The calendar had no underside writing. The plate had no under message. If I wrote during the day and looked 30 seconds later, the words were still there. A minute, 5, an hour. That night, something took them for itself. The people kept going. The kid who bikes without hands up Tremont and grins at cars like he wants to love them properly, gone. The man who runs the press at the little print shop and wears goggles like a joke except you realize he means them, gone. My neighbor across the hall, whose laugh I have been in small moments cruel about, gone. The upstairs window in her place stayed open for 3 days and then was shut consentingly by someone with keys. Clara started asking me before we opened if I slept, and I started telling her no. Eat, she said, like I could order it off a menu. The copier started to print two-sided without being asked, and when I tried to ask it to do anything else, it stalled and did that little dance devices do when they tilt their screen to unprofessional degrees. I told myself to set traps for the world. It's the way deer hunters talk, and I hate that it makes me sound like them. I bought a camera, not one connected to anything, a mechanical one with a wind lever and a click that takes up more room in a quiet room than it ought to. I took pictures of the boys' house, empty yard and pending sign. I took a picture of the bar at Rudy AS that held space as if it were saving itself for something. I took a picture of the harmonica man, S corner, and the newspapers that didn't hold down that one sheet that always catches the wind. I took pictures of signage in the city because signs make a city feel like it belongs to itself. When I dropped the film at the pharmacy, the girl at the counter stared at the envelope like I had asked her to read a foreign language. "We send these downtown," she said, like it pleased her. "You can come back Tuesday." Tuesday I went back and she handed me a paper bag with 2 sets of prints inside and a bill for $18 that felt like more, because it was, to me. The pictures were fine landscapes of nothing. They were good at not showing. The boys' house had a signpost with no sign on it. Rudy's bar had a gap the size of a person. The corner by the post office looked like it had never been loved by harmonica. At the bottom of the stack of prints was a picture I hadn't taken. It was of a desk, the chair pulled in, plant plastic, calendar barn, empty. It had my desk's orthogonal view, the way a man who sits too long sees things. I put it back in the bag and didn't talk for the rest of the afternoon because I didn't trust my mouth. "What do you do?" said Clara 2 days later. "If you think you're the only one noticing, do you tell someone and make them care?" She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at the window where the blind has a crank but no chain because the budget likes you to use your fingers. "Depends what it is," I said. "Say it's pets," she said. "Say all the cats in the neighborhood have decided to become birds." "Then you call a vet and you get told the birds are cats," I said. And she laughed because we share that anger where the only position that doesn't leave bruises is weary. "It feels like the papers want to fold themselves," she said. "Like they want to be smaller so they can be recycled and not have to be looked at twice." "Maybe the climate is good for paper today," I said. and then we both felt like we'd lied to a friend. At night, I made myself sit in the chair that doesn't squeak and stare at my face in the black window and say my name and the place I was born. I said my father's name, then stood and waited to see if my mouth would remove the word. I pressed my finger to the glass and left a smear that my face wore like a small mask. My phone rang and I thumbed the accept without looking at the screen like a person who pretends the number will always be the same. "You okay?" said my sister, and her voice broke something in my throat that had been hard for a week. "You ever get that thing where the town is eating itself?" I said, because I couldn't stage it better. "Daniel," she said, "you need sleep." "I need a list I can keep." "You can keep one," she said. "You wrote checklists on the wall for a year when you were 12. Mom made you stop. You taped one to the cat." "I didn't tape it to the cat," I said. "I taped it to the floor, and the cat used it." "Let me send you something," she said. "A book, paper. You'll like the smell. Put it on your table like a person." She sent a novel about a person who loses time. It came 2 days later in a box that smelled like glue and hands. I opened it, and the blurb on the back had a typo that gave the plot a different tilt. I set it on the table. The next morning, the book was not on the table, not on the floor, not in the bin, not in my hand. My sister asked if I cracked it, and I said I read the first page and liked the sentence about the way a bedroom can smell like pennies in old houses. I don't know if it had that sentence. It's the kind of sentence books like that want to have. The next to go was the man at the gas station who sells me a drink sometimes because I'd done a tea like alcohol and want to watch my hands do something that takes time. He had a missing finger and a person A's name tattooed on his wrist where the watch would go a name that made me like him because you don't tattoo a name other than a name you will have to answer for. The counter where he stood now had a "Help Wanted" sign in a plastic sleeve. The sleeve had a crease that made the letter P in help look like a 9. The coffee urns were full and someone had polished their tops to resemble a weekend. I asked the woman behind the counter since when, and she said, "Since the other night, I guess," and then looked through me the way people look when they redoing math about their own life and want you out of the room. On the way out, I bought a lottery ticket and held it in my hand and told myself when the number's done, T match I'll at least know I own something that disappoints me by my permission. The ticket was blank. The clerk said the machine had been moody. I held the blank paper against my palm and thought about the work of making numbers appear. On Tuesday of the next week, I watched the boy at the counter at Rudy's write a name on the cup for a woman. Then forget he had, then frown at his own hand like it had played him. Letters look silly when they're out of place. He wiped the name with his thumb, and the ink took to the pad of his finger, and then the air took the ink from his finger because the air is a thief. He looked at the pad and then at me, and for a second I thought we were going to have a conversation about the way surfaces forget us. Then he rang up a pastry and asked the customer how her day was, as if she hadn't already told him 3 words he could have used to answer in a way that sounded human. The erasures were more than people after. A man's dog turned into a leash he held on with a helpless smile. The pothole on King disappeared so clean you could see where the edges had once tried to make a shape and had given up. The graffiti under the rail bridge, somebody's name I might have written down if I had liked its unusual shape, turned into a scuff, then into clean wall. The bench by the bank had no plaque anymore, memorializing a person who must have died loving this place. I stood in front of the bank and made my body hold still because stillness makes a person feel testified to. The traffic light did its cycle, but for one left turn arrow, it didn't. The arrow stayed red. The cars waited, and you could feel the drivers start to feel their hands heavier. The light apologized to nobody and then began again like it hadn't sinned. I noticed the apology more than the sin. Clara asked me if I remembered a woman named Rosalie who used to bring us cookies in a tin at Christmas. I said yes, and then realized I had recruited the image of a person from some other kindness. Maybe I made her up, she said, and stared at the vending machine like it would tell her whether she had ever liked peanut butter crackers enough to taste this sad for not liking them now. She ran her finger along the buttons. Their labels had the numbers rubbed off by years. The machine reset itself. The light behind things blinked. The peanut butter crackers, wrapped in their own failings, turned into a neat stack of nothing where her hand hovered. I thought, if it keeps going this way, it will be me. The thought arrived like a clerk with a clipboard, not a prophet. It asked for a signature. I signed with my initials out of the habit that keeps me safe. I kept the book my sister gave me by the sink, thinking the sink is where the world goes to show you its face. It did not show me mine. I wrote who I was on receipts and put them in the freezer because I thought cold would slow this down. Freezer burn took the corners, the way cold eats paper. I stuck one under the glass of the table because the glass is honest and a little heartless. The morning showed me a table with nothing under it but the pattern of the wood floor. I said into the mirror, because I had no one else to ask, "Who are you?" The mirror did not answer with my name or any other. It gave back a face that looked like mine, and a mouth that moved, and a brow with a little line between it, like I had spent a decade thinking I was going to have to apologize for being quiet. The afternoon before I stopped going to work, I took the bus to the last stop on the line out by the college. The driver's radio played a baseball game with the kind of hope that only exists in plays that happen over grass. A man sat across from me with a tattoo of a woman on his forearm that no woman could live up to, even if the artist had been kinder. I wanted to touch the tattoo to see if ink holds better than names. I didn't, because touch is a thing you pay for later. At the last stop, I stood on the sidewalk and listened to the crosswalk signal beep like I was deaf. It counted down blinking numbers that made me anxious, and then asked me to be patient with a sign that used the word walk like a prayer. I walked because sometimes obedience is the only thing you can give yourself. On the way back, I stopped at the little shop that sells dresses and paintings and candles that cost 2 hours. The woman behind the counter had a face I knew from seeing it in a picture online, not from knowing her. She wore a ring that could make a person forgive a town if that person liked rings. "You look lost," she said, not unkindly. "Everybody says that these days," I said. "About everything." She nodded. "You read that piece," she said, "about people misremembering things on purpose. They say it's the stress. The brain saves weight." "Does it save it for later?" I said. She smiled and smoothed the paper bag in front of her with her fingers. "Depends what kind of person you aim to be," she said. "They say it makes you happier if you forget a little." "I'm not happier," I said. "Try a candle," she said. "You like lilac or earth?" "Neither," I said. "Something like the inside of a church." "We don't sell guilt," she said, and handed me a card with a leaf on it that had the shop's name written in a looped font I didn't trust. The card felt too smooth. I put it in my pocket and forgot about it until I needed something to write my name on and discovered it had become blank notepaper. I stopped going to work after I forgot the code to the door. My hand punched it in every morning for years. It lives in my wrist bones. The keypad blinked a patient blink, and then the light went solid red. I typed my name in with my thumb like it was 1999. The light watched me. I called Clara from the sidewalk. "I can't remember," I said. "You can't remember what?" she said. And then, because she is the kind of person who knows what kindness is worth when you stick it on a word, she said, "It's okay. Sit on the bench, I'll come down." I sat. She came down. We stared at each other a minute like a test we were about to fail but hadn't decided how. She says my name too carefully when she is worried. "Take the day," she said. My chair upstairs squeaked politely under a body that wasn't mine, I imagined. The scanner hiccuped without a witness. I walked home slow. I made myself a different kind of trapped list. I wrote down every sound in the apartment that would betray me if it changed. The fridge hum, pitched about a whoosh higher than the bus idling below. The bathroom fan you can hear in the next room if the sink smells like last week. The radiator when it decides to remind you it is still a body that carries heat to other bodies. A little ping like a piece of silverware being set down on a plate in the kitchen of a restaurant that wants to appear less busy than it is. The neighbor's steps, which tell you more about people than their speech does. I map the steps. The woman with the laugh, her, heavy then light. The couple that bangs the door with their hips because they won, to put the bag down to unlock. Phil's careful shuffle because he is careful even when he's alone. I listened and told myself, if any of these sounds leave, I will know. I slept in a chair like a man waiting his turn at something he doesn't want to attend. In the morning, the fridge hum was lower. The radiator stayed off when the heat should have asked it to speak. The steps outside my door were the steps of no one. I stared through the peephole at a hallway that reflects your own eye back at you and puts a thumbprint inside the glass to make sure you never forget how close you put yourself to a thing that sees. I walked to my mother's to tell her about the way names slip. I went slow across town with the tail end of a damp front stuck to my shirt. I turned on Spoke where the street curves and becomes Paper Mill Road. The place at the corner that advertises tools they only existed when men set their own valves had a banner that said grand opening like they were practicing something they had already done. The sidewalk in front of her house had the little divot from where the city planted a street tree 6 years ago and forgot that trees are people who ask for things and then die when they aren't brought to the table for those conversations. The mange of newspaper scraps that always catches behind the porch step wasn't there. The porch had no papers. Her mailbox showed its embarrassed flag. I knocked. I listened to the silence make all its shapes. A woman I didn't know opened the door. She had the look of a person who expects to be asked for favors and has grown the personality to say no with a face everyone will forgive. "Can I help you?" she said. "My mother," I said, and had to make my throat behave. "Margaret, she lives here." The woman cocked her head in a way that made me want to pass her a bill. "We bought this place from the bank last spring," she said. "It was empty." The entryway still smelled like my mother's house, which is to say it smelled like old paper dried and something sweet that had no fat in it. I said, "She kept the mixing bowls on the top shelf in the kitchen, white enamel with a little blue ring, the smallest one chipped on the lip." I hated myself for telling this to a stranger, but I'd run out of places to put it. "The countertops," she said, still in the polite tone that would serve her well, "are new." She opened the door a degree to mean goodbye, and I let her off the hook because we were both practicing a script and none of it belonged to us. On the way back, I stopped at the park, where the old men with generous beards play checkers and forget to look at the board. I like the way checker pieces sound when they are pressed into wood that has learned to give. The men were gone. The table was clean as a brochure. The trees looked taller, and I understood we had learned nothing. I watched a squirrel bury something and made myself admit that this was more honest than I was. I went home and opened the sheet closet and smelled the closet, and it smelled like sheets. It became a countdown then. I won't pretend I didn't count. I counted like a man on a working dock, watching as crates arriving in hourly intervals get fewer. I wrote nothing because my writing had become what happens to writing in a city where water pipes decide once a month to be bold. I said things to myself and then sang them because the voice enjoys being told to put a tune under demands. I took pictures and they came back like a season that doesn't admit to itself it has changed. People looked at me and some of them looked away like I had asked them to honor something in them that didn't want to stand up. The county kept posting advisories that read like apologies dipped in official voice. We were urged to remain calm about system of record mismatches. We were asked to verify facts with oneself when in doubt. Do not rely on third-party validation. One email said in a page long enough to bore a healthy person, which made me laugh and then want to break something small and satisfying. I stopped sleeping in bed. I sat in the chair where my body has made the cushion a shape of me and dozed in bursts that tasted like pennies. My face in the dark window took on the sheen of a person who sits inside and waits to become something he can understand. A thunderstorm forgot to organize itself in the west and lay across the town. The lightning reminded our lights how to behave, and the fridge died and then decided to find itself again. I said my name out loud in the dark, and the room gave the sound back to me without the last letter. I said it again, and it had only the first syllable. I laughed then because I am the kind of man who laughs when his mouth is frightened of making other shapes. I put my fingers in my mouth and felt the shape my tongue had to make to say the missing part. I couldn't get my body to make it. The whole name had been taken from my mouth for 1 second and then another, and the seconds stretched into a string you could trip on in the hall. I wrote on tape then, old cassette tape. I found the deck in the closet behind a vacuum that pretends to do more than it does. The deck smelled like old plastic and the tiny pellets you leave inside a package to keep it from believing in moisture. I pushed the tape in and pressed record and said my name and my mother yes and the street I was born on. I said the name of the school where I learned to keep my head down when boys decided to move in packs. I said the name of the first girl I loved because I've learned the physics of not saying the names that matter. The tape turned with a little humility. I pressed stop and rewound and pressed play. The hiss of blankness came like a lover's breath. I heard the buttons click, recorder back into carapace. I heard nothing else. I watched the tape move and tried to imagine it holding me, and I could not. I said into the microphone, "Who are you?" And the voice that came back a moment later, because my mind still wanted to keep a few electric lights on in a blackout, was air. The day before I went, I took every piece of identification I owned and put it on the table. The driver's license, the worthless laminated work ID they handed us 4 years ago with a photograph I used to call smug until I realized it was hopeful. The birth certificate with its puckered seal. The social security card, a version of me had thought fit nicely tucked behind a visa in the same slot. The library card, even though the library was shut for mold. The grocery discount thing that pretends to know me better than it does. I took a picture of them, and my phone's camera let me. I backed the picture up to the cloud, because I have learned to behave like a person who believes in clouds. The next morning, the table was clean. The feeling I had then has to be put plain. It was relief. Then something else. The relief was the kind you get when you stop trying to hold a door against a wind you never had a chance with. The something else was worse. It had the taste of the room where happiness is kept, but none of the furniture. I don't have an ending that takes the shape of an event. The thing that happens when it's your turn is not theatrical. I went to bed on a Sunday, feeling like a man at the end of a weekend he isn't done with. I set my phone on the table and plugged it into the thin cord at the outlet by the bookcase. I put my wallet and keys in the bowl with the little crack that has never traveled. I turned the deadbolt and then checked it, which is the only ritual I never made adjustments to. I lay down. There is a moment in the night when the refrigerator hum goes out for a certain number of heartbeats, and the whole building seems to hold itself just to see if anyone will notice. That moment came, and I said the first half of my name out loud like a charm. The apartment said nothing back. I slept the kind of sleep that is all images and no feeling. I woke to a room that had decided to give itself to the day without me. A man named Phil across the hall went to work. He held the door for a neighbor without saying a name, because names had become a currency nobody wanted to handle. The elevator took him down to the lobby with a patience reserved for old machines. The clerk at the gas station sold a coffee, and the urns reflected a shorter set of lights. The kid at the counter at Rudy's wrote a full name, all letters, on a cup, and then forgot to call it out. The harmonica at the corner didn't E.T. play, and nobody missed it, because nobody does when you've taught them to stop loving a thing. The boys' house had no chalk. Clara counted forms and had a brief thought about a face with a mouth that couldn't finish its sentences. She shook her head and then smiled at a woman with a problem nobody could solve to anyone's satisfaction. The river moved like it had been given new orders and wanted to see what would happen if it followed them. On my kitchen table, the bowl with the crack had nothing in it. My phone sat where I had left it, but when it lit, it had no lock screen photo. The texts were blank bubbles with blank times. The charger did not hum, as it fed a device that had forgotten its own appetite. The front door had no number, just painted metal tidy enough to live in a brochure. In the wall by the door, there was a little rectangle where a photo frame had never hung. The fridge hummed and then chose another note and was pleased with the choice. The clock on the wall clicked its seconds right along the same way, which is all any clock is ever going to do for a man. The mirror in the bathroom had no smear. The towel hung square and dry and looked like it had never had to do the work of forgiving anyone for the smell of their body. Outside, the light at the corner cycled, and the left arrow remembered itself. Somebody put a poster up for a new restaurant. A few feet away, a notice came down from a post, ripped along a line as clean as a breath. A bus rolled by and hissed something back at the street it had come from. The library's closure notice got another staple through it, this one a little proud. A stack of permits lay on a desk in a building where a jacket had never been thrown over a chair. If you went to the building and asked for me, your mouth would feel odd saying a name that didn't find purchase, and you would walk home with the same 2 feet you came on. Sure, it's normal to use a name once and then never again because you must have got it wrong. I can tell you this because sometimes there's a second that stands out like a pinprick in the room where you sleep. Sometimes in that second, you think you see a person turned sideways in glass. Your height, your way of holding yourself, so your shoulders never offend anyone. Your habit of letting your hands decide when you're done speaking. Sometimes, too, your ear picks the sound of a mouth trying to say its name and getting only the first sound out. If you hear that, don't listen hard. Don't answer. Go about your day. The doors open like you built them to, and your house smells like a place you earned. The clerk at the counter will write your name whole and you won't notice. I'll drop your receipts in a drawer, and they will keep their ink until they've done tea. And if you feel a small gap in the shape of the morning, a quiet void where a person should have been, you'll look at it, and your mind will hand you a broom, because that's what it learned to do. Clean up. You'll say to yourself, then you'll say, what mess, and the day will continue. The light will change. The bus will come, the little advisory will get posted with its words like likely and temporary and avoid, and all the while the city will be finishing something that doesn't need your help. You'll sleep. By morning, there will be no record of the part of your voice that tried to answer when asked who you were. You will be exactly what the papers say if anybody bothers to ask them. The rest is a silence that doesn't have to try hard to sound like peace. If this story lands with you, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys quiet literary horror. Comments are open. Tell me your favorite image or line.